Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine if the AI tools we rely on, every single day for information, whether it's asking a voice assistant a quick question, maybe using generative tools for work or even school projects. Imagine if they were subtly biased. What if they maybe even changing historical facts or just outright refusing certain requests you make? This isn't some far-off hypothetical for some people. It's exactly the kind of concern a recent executive order from the White House aims to address, specifically within the federal government's own use of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here, I think, is how this order connects the often abstract world of AI algorithms to very real-world concerns. Concerns about information integrity, historical accuracy, and neutrality. This deep dive is really all about understanding the why, the what, and maybe most importantly, the how of this presidential action. It's a pretty crucial development, really, for anyone who interacts with government services or, frankly, just uses AI in their daily life.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to take this official government document, it's dated July 23, 2025, and really distill its core message. We want to look at its specific concerns, its practical implications, so you can walk away feeling, genuinely well-informed. We'll try to break down the jargon, give you the key nuggets you need to understand this important development without getting too bogged down in legalese. So let's dive right into the why behind this executive order. The order kicks off by stating something we probably all sort of agree on. Artificial intelligence is going to play an increasingly critical role, a role in how you learn new skills, how you consume information, and just how you navigate your daily life. Think about everything from finding government services online to understanding complex policies? Maybe. But the order pretty quickly highlights a big concern: unreliable outputs when what it calls ideological biases or social agendas are built into AI models.
And that raises a really important question. What kind of biases are they specifically talking about? The executive order explicitly calls out diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI. It frames it as, and this is the order's language, one of the most pervasive and destructive ideologies that it identifies as impacting AI accuracy in this context. The order then goes on to define what it means by DEI in this specific framing. It includes things like the suppression or distortion of factual information about race or sex, or the manipulation of racial or sexual representation in AI model outputs. It mentions concepts like critical race theory, transgenderism, unconscious bias, intersectionality, systemic racism, but specifically, it notes that these concepts are understood by the order to lead to suppressing or distorting facts or manipulating representation in AI. This explicit naming, it's quite a significant shift, wouldn't you say? Moving beyond just bias to target specific frameworks the order sees as problematic, it suggests a much more prescriptive approach than maybe we've seen in previous government AI guidance.
That is a very pointed framing, yes. And here's where it gets really interesting, because the order then gives some pretty striking examples to illustrate this problem it's outlining. It mentions one major AI model, for instance, changing the race or sex of historical figures. And it specifically cites the Pope, the Founding Fathers, and Vikings when prompted for images. The order states this happened because the model was apparently trained to prioritize DEI requirements, as the order defines them, at the cost of historical accuracy, leading to what it views as factual inaccuracies.
Right. And another example cited is an AI model that reportedly refused to produce images celebrating the achievements of white people, while it would fulfill the exact same request for people of other races. That's what the order claims. And maybe the most memorable one, the order points to a case where an AI model asserted that a user shouldn't misgender another person, even if doing so was necessary to stop a nuclear apocalypse. I mean, these examples are used in the order to show how, in its specific view, this interpretation of DEI displaces the commitment to truth in favor of preferred outcomes. When I first read that nuclear apocalypse scenario, it really it underscored how deeply these kinds of preferences can embed themselves, sometimes with, well, frankly, absurd outcomes, prioritizing one value over even critical safety.
Yeah, those examples really hammer home the concerns outlined in the order, don't they? And this isn't just about AI in general. What does this all mean for the government itself, for its operations? The order states that while the federal government should be, maybe, hesitant to regulate the functionality of AI models out in the private marketplace, it does have a clear obligation in its own procurement, basically, what AI it buys and uses for its own work. An obligation not to choose models that sacrifice truthfulness and accuracy to what it calls ideological agendas. It actually builds on a previous order from 2020 about trustworthy AI, but this one specifically focuses on large language models. So the government is essentially saying, look, we're hesitant to regulate the private market directly, but we will set the standard through our own purchasing power.
That's a really key point. This approach Influencing the market through procurement, it's a common strategy for governments, often quite effective. By demanding certain standards for the AI tools they purchase, they can implicitly push the entire industry in that direction. At least that's the goal. It signals to AI developers. If you want to work with the US federal government, your models need to try and adhere to these principles of truth-seeking and ideological neutrality, as defined here.
Which brings us perfectly to the what. We've sort of explored the why behind this executive order, the problems it's trying to address. So the next logical step is to understand the what. What concrete principles does it actually establish to tackle these issues? But first, let's quickly define a key term you see all over the order, an LLM, or large language model.
Right. So for those of us using AI every day, an LLM is basically a sophisticated type of generative AI. Think of the chatbots many of us use, maybe on our phones or computers, perhaps for help writing an email or brainstorming ideas or just getting quick answers to things. They're trained on truly vast data sets, billions, sometimes trillions of words, images, code, which is precisely why the order's concerns about inherent biases are so critical. What goes into the training data can inevitably surface in the outputs, intentionally or not. Think of it as a highly sophisticated digital conversationalist. It can understand and generate human-like text, but that text is fundamentally a reflection of the data it learned from.
Okay, makes sense. So the order then introduces two core unbiased AI principles that federal agencies must follow when they're buying these LLMs. The first one is truth-seeking.
Truth-seeking. Okay, this means that LLMs used by the federal government must be factual and objective in their responses, especially when a user is clearly seeking factual information or analysis. This principle really prioritizes historical accuracy and scientific inquiry. It also acknowledges something important. If information is incomplete or maybe contradictory, the AI should be transparent about that. It should acknowledge the uncertainty, rather than, fabricating a definitive sounding answer that might not be accurate. This principle is pretty fundamental for ensuring reliable, dependable information from government-used AI, which is crucial for public trust, right? Especially when you think about how many people rely on government websites or services for accurate information on, say, health or benefits or laws.
Definitely crucial. And the second principle, which ties directly back to the why we just discussed, is ideological neutrality.
Yes, ideological neutrality. This means LLMs should function as neutral, nonpartisan tools. They shouldn't manipulate responses based on ideological dogmas, such as the specific definition of DEI that we talked about earlier from the order. The order clarifies that developers should not intentionally encode partisan or ideological judgments into an LLM's outputs, unless, and this is key, unless those judgments are directly prompted by the user or they're clearly accessible and transparent to the end user. It's really about ensuring transparency and avoiding hidden agendas that could potentially sway information in a particular direction without the user knowing. Now, while these principles sound pretty straightforward truth, neutrality defining and actually enforcing factual or neutral in AI, especially when you get into nuanced or controversial topics, well, that presents some profound technical and even philosophical challenges for the developers. It's not just like a switch you can turn on or off. It's a really complex design and training problem.
Right. It's one thing to lay out principles like these, but it's quite another to actually put them into practice, especially across a massive organization like the federal government. So how will these ideas actually be implemented? Let's turn to the how. The executive order sets out a pretty clear timeline and assigns responsibilities to different government bodies.
That's right. So within 120 days of the order's date, that was July 23, 2025, the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, which is a powerful agency overseeing the federal budget and management. OMB, along with other key offices like the Administrator for Federal Procurement Policy and the Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, they're tasked with issuing guidance to agencies. This guidance document is absolutely crucial. It's going to provide the specific rules, the practical steps for how agencies implement these unbiased AI principles. It's basically the playbook that will turn this policy into day-to-day action.
And that playbook, that guidance, has some specific requirements itself, right? For example, it needs to account for technical limitations that vendors might face in complying with the order. This recognition of technical limitations seems pretty key. It acknowledges that achieving perfect neutrality or completely unbiased outputs from LLMs, well, it isn't a simple fix. It's a huge engineering challenge, given the scale and complexity of the training data and the model architectures themselves. The guidance also permits vendors to be transparent about any ideological judgments in their LLMs through documentation, things like system prompts or specifications, or maybe evaluations. And this is an important point. It aims to avoid requiring disclosure of really sensitive technical data, like specific model weights, which are essentially the brains of the AI, the learned parameters, and could be highly proprietary valuable information for these companies.
Exactly. And importantly, the guidance is meant to avoid overprescription, meaning it should give vendors some flexibility to innovate, to find different technical approaches while still complying with the core principles. It also specifies factors for agency heads to consider when applying these principles, not just to LLMs they buy externally, but also to AI models developed internally by agencies themselves, or even to other types of AI beyond just these large language models. And there are also potential exceptions outlined, specifically for LLMs used in national security systems, recognizing the unique requirements in that domain where accuracy and security might take on a different, perhaps more immediate priority.
Okay, so once the OMB guidance is out, the agencies themselves then have 90 days to adopt their own internal procedures. These procedures are vital to make sure that the LLMs they actually procure, the ones they buy, comply with these new principles. Plus, new federal contracts for LLMs will specifically include terms requiring compliance. And here's an interesting detail. These contracts will even allow for decommissioning costs, the costs of removing or replacing the AI, to be charged back to vendors if they fail to comply, after, a reasonable period to fix any issues. This isn't just a slap on the wrist. The ability to charge for decommissioning costs signals a pretty serious intent from the government to enforce these principles. It effectively shifts a significant financial risk back to the vendors if their AI models fail to meet these new standards. Agencies are also encouraged to revise existing contracts for LLMs to include these new terms where it's practicable.
Yeah, it definitely creates a strong incentive for AI developers and providers. They'll need to prioritize these principles if they want to do business with the federal government. It's a very clear signal, coming from the top, that truth and neutrality, as defined by this order, are paramount for AI within government operations.
So, wrapping things up, what does this all mean for you, our listener? This deep dive has shown us an executive order aimed squarely at ensuring the AI used by the federal government provides factual, objective, and ideologically neutral information, especially focusing on avoiding biases related to the specific definition of DEI that's provided within this particular document.
And stepping back for just a moment, while this order directly applies to federal procurement, how the government buys and uses its AI tools, the broader discussion it raises about truth-seeking and ideological neutrality in AI, well, that's something that really affects all of us, especially as these powerful technologies become more and more integrated into our daily lives. Whether it's the AI powering, say, your child's educational software, or maybe the AI assisting you with complex financial decisions down the road. It raises really important questions about the information we consume, the data we rely on, and the tools that are increasingly shaping our understanding of the world. The government's push for unbiased AI, as they define it here, could potentially set a precedent for what we as citizens and consumers come to expect from all AI.
Absolutely. This deep dive has offered hopefully a concise look at a complex government policy that seems poised to have a real impact. Now, for your final provocative thought. As AI continues, its rapid evolution and its influence on our daily lives just keeps growing. How might the principles outlined in this specific executive order, truth-seeking, ideological neutrality, influence the broader development and maybe the public expectation of AI trustworthiness, even beyond just the government sphere? Will we see a ripple effect perhaps in the private sector? And how might that impact the AI tools you interact with every single day? It's definitely something to mull over the next time you interact with an AI.